So we're now going to talk about accruals and prepayments, and this is one of the more difficult things at the level 3, especially in this unit. So it's something that you really need to concentrate on and practice with. So if we start off by thinking about when is an accrual used, then we're going to take a look at when is a prepayment used. And then what we're going to take a look at is what happens at the beginning of the next financial year. So we're going to talk through an accrual and a prepayment from beginning to end. So if we start off with accruals, when is an accrual required? When do we actually need an accrual in the accounts? And if we think first of all about expenses, an accrual is required if we've incurred the expense, so we've got the lights on, we've got the heating on, we've got that on, we're using it now, but we haven't received the bill yet. And we're going to receive the bill next financial year. So we need an accrual for that. We need to put that figure into the accounts, even though at this moment in time, we've not received the invoice. It's also required from an income perspective. So again, we've completed the sale, we've done the sale, but as yet, we've not raised the invoice. So we accrue for that income. So we need to put that income into this year because we're not going to raise the invoice until next year. So they are the two times when an accrual is required. So now we need to think about the double entry, and we always need to be going back to, is it an expense, is it income, is it an asset, is it a liability? Are we increasing it? Are we decreasing it? And if we work through that step-by-step motion, we should then be able to work out whether we're debiting or crediting. So if we start off with an expense, we've said that the accrual is required when we need to increase the amount in expenditure. So we've done the expenditure, we just haven't received the invoice yet, so we need to increase it. So if we're going to increase an expense, we know we debit it. So when we put an accrual in, we always debit the expense account. And in our example here, at the end of the month, I've put in £100 and we've just increased that expense account. We also know, because we know this from accounting rules, if we've got a debit for £100, we need a credit for £100. So the opposite entry is to credit accruals with £100. So when we enter the accrual into the accounts, we debit the expense account and we credit accruals. When it comes to income, it's the opposite way round. Again, we need to increase the amount of income. We need to increase the amount of money in our sales account. And we know that to increase an income account, to increase a sales account, we're going to credit it. So if we've got an accrual, we're going to need to credit the sales account. And again, following the same principle, if we've got a credit entry, and in our example, £200, so we've got that, we've credited the income account with £200, we need a debit entry. And in this example, the debit entry goes to accruals. So with income, we're going to credit income, debit accruals. We then need to start to think about what happens at the beginning of the next financial year. Because if we've increased our expenditure last year for £100 for an invoice we've not received yet, we are going to receive that invoice in the next financial year. So if we leave that £100 sat in the expenditure last year, and when the invoice comes in this year, we're going to have £100, we've duplicated it now, so we've doubled up on it. So with accruals and prepayments, which we'll see later, at the beginning of the financial year, of the next financial year, we always reverse them out. So when an accrual goes into the accounts at the end of the financial year, we debit expenditure and we credit accruals. This time, we're going to do the opposite. So now, to reverse it out, we need to credit the expenditure and debit the accruals. So in our example, we've credited expenditure with £100 on the first of the following month. So we've got rid of that expenditure so that we don't double up on it. The same goes with the income. So last year we put the income in, we credited income and we debited accruals. And this year we need to reverse that out because otherwise when we do raise the invoice, we're duplicating. We've got too much in. So we reverse it out, and to reverse it, we need to debit the income. So in our example, it's £200, and we'll then credit the accruals, and that gets rid of it. So now we need to start to think about prepayments and when prepayments are necessary. So a prepayment is when, and we can have this for expenses and we can have it for income, but a prepayment is when you've paid for something in one financial year, but it relates to the following financial year. So if we're thinking about expenditure, we've perhaps paid for the rent. Now, this year, we've paid 12 months up front, but we only need 6 months in this accounting period. You can have the same for income as well, so you can have prepaid income. So that could be when you've raised an invoice for something that's not actually happened yet and isn't going to happen until the following financial year. So that's prepaid. We've received it in advance of when we need it. So now we need to think about the double entry for prepayments. And again, always thinking about, is it an expense? Is it income? Is it an asset? Is it liability? Am I increasing it? Am I decreasing it? So if you think about a prepayment, we've just said that it's expenditure that we've paid for now, we've had the invoice for now, and we don't need it till next year. So now we've got too much in the expenditure account, so we need to reduce that. And we know that if we reduce expenditure, if we reduce an expense, we credit it. So in our example, we've put a credit entry in to the expense account for £150. We also know if we've got a credit entry for £150, we need a debit entry. So this debit entry goes to prepayments. If we then think about the income, so this time with income, we've received too much, we've got too much income this year, it relates to next year. So we need to decrease the income account. So again, if we increase income, we credit it. So we're decreasing it, so we're going to debit it. So we're going to debit the income account, and in our example, it's with £300. So we debit the income account with £300. We need another entry, so we're going to credit the prepayment account with £300. So that's put the prepayment in for expenses and for income. At the beginning of the next financial year, we need to reverse it. So exactly the same as we talked about with an accrual, where we were saying we'd duplicate it if we left it in, it works the same with a prepayment. So what would happen is, last year we'd have taken the expenditure out, but if we don't reverse it, we aren't going to be putting it into this year. So this year we need to put the expenditure in. So when we reverse it, we're going to debit the expense account. So in our example, we're debiting it with £150. The opposite entry, the credit, goes to the prepayment account. The same is then true for the income. Again, we took it out of last year, we reduced last year's income. We need to put it in this year's, otherwise we won't have it. So we need to credit the income account. And in our example, we're crediting it with £300. And that then reverses out what we did last year. So an accrual is used when we've not got that expenditure or we've not got that income in the accounts and we need it. A prepayment is used when we've got the income and we've got the expenditure, but we don't need it till next year, so we're taking it out. And the double entry is credit accruals, debit expenses, and reverse it at the beginning of the next year. And for prepayments, you're going to debit the prepayments and credit the expenses and reverse it for the next year.